All right, guys, thanks for joining our Lunch and Learn today. Today we have Drew Boland with Guaranteed Rate. Drew, you've been in the business for how long now?
October of 2003, so 60 plus years.
Wow, you're a vet.
A lot longer than I expected when I got into it.
Yeah. And you've always been with Guaranteed Rate, correct?
I started at Lakeshore Funding and moved over to Guaranteed Rate in February of 05.
Okay, cool. So only two companies. And who is Drew Boland? Is Drew Boland married? Does he have children? What's
Drew Boland is married. I have 3 kids. So I have a 5.5-year-old boy, 2.5-year-old girl, and then we had a baby boy on March 6th. So right before the quarantine hit.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Baby. That's awesome. And Drew, what do you like to do for fun? Are you an active person? Do you ride bikes? Do you play the guitar? What do you do?
You nailed it. I ride a lot of bikes, both mountain biking and road cycling. I would say that's probably my number one passion. I do play guitar. That is just more of a meditative thing for me to do, not something that I'm really playing in front of other people.
Awesome. Cool. All right. So you're from Chicago, right? Grew up in Chicago and went to school in Chicago as far as high school is concerned. Where college career out in Montana?
Yeah, I went to the University of Montana for my undergrad, Missoula, Montana.
Okay. And then you came back here, and did you get right into the mortgage business, or what did you do first?
First thing I did. Yep. I moved back to Chicago to get into the mortgage business. At that point, I was pretty young, and I thought it was something I would just try out for a few years and get a little bit of business sense and figure out what was next. Okay. And here we sit, 16 years later.
16 years later. Now, was it something that I'm not going to say that, you're an awesome guy. I'm not going to say like, oh man, I'm aspiring to be a mortgage broker, right? So what was it that drew you to the mortgage lending world?
It was an opportunity more than anything at that point. I had family in real estate, family that were agents, and I considered going to work with them as an agent. And at that time, being right out of college, I was really just looking for something with a little bit more like structure early on, and to learn more about the financing side and the banking side of things. And like I said, it was really like, I thought it was something I'd do for a few years and then either get into the real estate side or do something else in the industry. But it's been an awesome fit for me all the way along.
That's great. And now, Drew, what does your business look like today? Like how many transactions are you doing? What kind of volume are you looking like? What does your team look like?
Yeah, so currently, my current pipeline is 114 loans in the pipeline today. We are averaging closing in this market between 40 to 55 loans a month. Okay. In a normal year, obviously we're very refinance heavy right now. So we are processing a lot of applications for refinancing. In a normal year, last year, for instance, we closed 340 loans for the year.
Wow, 340 loans. Yeah. And Drew, to put that in perspective, what does an average lender do?
An average lender probably does 6 to 8 loans a month. If you looked at the national average, in Chicago, we have a lot of top producers, right? Yes. And I would say, your higher end producers are doing between 20 to 25 a month, maybe.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So that's great, man. Congratulations on your growth there.
Thank you.
That's impressive. So we're going to talk about how you got there, right? But Drew, I've known you for quite some time, and I know that mindset is very important to you. And these themes during these, not purposefully, but these themes now from these lunch and learns have really focused on mindset, to be honest with you. So not only during a time of chaos and pandemic, but how do you approach the business as far as a mindset is concerned?
Yeah, well, I would say that I had a shift in mindset about 6 years ago, and it really showed in my production level. From 2014 to 15, I doubled my production, and then about another 50% increase into 2016. What for me, the mindset was first and foremost was get out of my own way. I had to learn how to delegate better than I was. I, for years, had been successful in the mortgage business, but really kind of hit what I saw as a ceiling. And quite frankly, Joe, like I believed that that was my ceiling. And I was like, from a mindset perspective, I was oddly okay with it.
Yeah.
And then I just had some shift in my personal life, and some things became clearer to me. And I realized that the only person putting the ceiling on was me. And with that, I started to embrace, Guarantee Rate has some incredible, an incredible platform for us. And much like KW, where we're in a team setting, and I have a whole team that supports me. I started to embrace that model more than I had in the past. I was kind of a control freak before, which created a ceiling. And embracing that model, letting go of some of the control and being able to delegate, I started to see that success come about. I started to see myself breaking that ceiling. And I always say that success begets success, meaning that as soon as you start to feel that, as soon as you have that breakthrough, there's this awakening, this eye-opening of like, oh wow, like I can do that. Yeah. And then, and then you get a taste of that, and then you want more.
Yeah, right.
And it's not about what, having more business and having less of a life. I mean, that was the key for me. And in those years, those years that I felt like I broke through my production levels from 2014 on, particularly 14 to 16, that was when I had my first child. Yeah. My oldest son was born in September of 14. And so that was a mindset shift big time, because now I had to balance family.
Yeah, you got to balance somebody, and you're accountable to somebody else now, right?
Exactly. It's a good motivator.
Yeah. So, Drew, what you said again was kind of a reoccurring theme here, and I love that you touched on that. Was you didn't, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, but what I heard you say was you didn't understand the power of leverage.
Yeah,
right.
100%. I didn't understand that I didn't understand that other people could support me as well, or much better, to be honest, than I could support myself.
Yeah. So you came to the realization that people can do it at a higher level than you, but your world had to be big enough for them to live within.
For sure. Yep. Yeah. And, we're fortunate the Chicago real estate market is an exciting market, right? And you see this incredible success within the industry, right? And you see these people putting up incredible numbers of production levels. And I just had to ask myself, like, what's holding me from that, right? I quite frankly, to be totally blunt, I saw people that I don't think are any smarter or harder working than I am, that were having much greater success.
Yeah.
And that was a big mindset thing.
We're in our mid 30s of these lunch and learns, but at about like 15, Kevin Hinton said, hey, if that person can do it, why can't I? Right. And
that is 100% it. That was my breakthrough in mindset.
Yeah. Like, wait a minute, how come they can do it, but I couldn't?
I saw someone that I don't respect very much doing almost double the volume that I do. And that was my moment of like, wait a second.
So you had a moment of clarity that said, all right, I'm going to go do this. Right.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So Drew, with once you break the ceiling of the limited belief of, hey, I can do this and I'm going to do it, what was the strategy that you approached your business with?
Yeah, I mean, it was one change at a time, right? I mean, it was one step at a time, but also like taking off one bite at a time, as far as how I can improve my systems, how I can improve my team. I think hiring was a key component for me. And when I say hiring, I mean hiring the right people. Mm-hmm. I consider myself a pretty loyal person, and I think at times to a fault. And so I was stuck in a situation for many years where I didn't have the right tools. I didn't have the right people supporting me. And so that was one of the first kind of scratching at the surface, right? I hired a sales assistant. That was a game changer for me. My previous sales assistant, it wasn't the right fit. And then I hired a few new processors. That was like step number one. That created a confidence level for me to be able to let go, to be able to start to like go down that path of like relinquishing control of certain aspects of the process.
Mhm.
And like I said, it was one at a time, right? Like I wasn't ready to just give up all control and go willy-nilly. My business is 100% built on referrals. And I know that, the people who send me business expect a certain level of not only of service, but just of execution,
Yeah.
right? And being able to get things done, not only on time, but efficiently and smoothly.
So your first strategy to your approach after you broke through the ceiling was, I'm going to go on a journey to find the right people.
That was number one.
That was number one. Okay.
Yep.
And then you said, and then with the right people, I'm going to put the systems in place, right?
Correct. Yep.
So, a lot of us, we have a stager on, and then we have a lot of people listening in, but we also have a lot of real estate agents. So it'd be interesting to hear from your perspective, what are the systems that you guys need as far as the lending world is concerned? Like, what are the main systems that you guys set up?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much that goes into processing a loan that really the consumers, even real estate professionals, don't see or get necessarily. As far as putting the systems in place, it started with me identifying where my weak spots were, right? And then how to improve on those spots. The biggest things that are kind of in the background is navigating a client's expectations and also navigating their paperwork, particularly when we're talking about self-employed borrowers, self-employed buyers, right? If somebody comes to us and they're a W-2 employee and they've been at the same job for 2+ years and they're making 100 grand and they're putting 5% down, that's not a challenging file. Okay. Even in that case, there's still a number of hoops we're jumping through. We're doing all sorts of verifications in the background of employment. We're looking at bank statements. You guys have all heard of the pitfalls of people depositing cash or money kind of moving around that we can't source, things like that. That's like all the background stuff the hoops that we're jumping through. You take that same buyer and now make them a business owner, and it exponentially increases the scrutiny that we're going to put a client through. And those systems then break down to where is it my level of pre-approval and of pre-screening, right? And then to the next level, which is my front-end processor, who is an expert at underwriting guidelines, at processing, and then the next level going to underwriting. And each step of the way, you're getting a different set of eyes on things. And, in a inefficient world, you can get 3 different opinions on certain things, right? And so that's where the efficiencies are huge as far as understanding what I'm looking at and how I'm viewing something. My processor has to be in line with that, and we have to be collaborative. And then my underwriter has to be on the same page as well.
So Drew, as a lender, how involved are you? How involved are you as the lead in those 3 different stages? Like,
I'm very involved up front. I'm incredibly involved. And I know a lot of loan officers that are doing my level of production and some that are doing more aren't as involved. And it's just a personality trait, I think, for me. And also a lot surrounds around my relationships with where my referrals come from. So to answer your question directly, Joe, I do a ton of work up front. Okay. So like we have them fill out an online application. I review that application. My assistant will pre-screen it for me and kind of point out any pitfalls, right? If we're talking about a simple W-2 borrower, it's pretty simple, but and he can see any potential issues there, which there shouldn't be many. And then I get on the phone with the buyer and I run them through what to expect for obviously interest rates and payments, but what to expect for closing costs. People that are new to Chicago can have sticker shock as far as closing costs go, right? Especially if they're coming from from more rural areas of the country. Yeah, Chicago's obviously not the most expensive. I mean, try buying a place in New York City, and it'll blow your mind. But it can be a sticker shock for a lot of people, and it's really important. Like my biggest thing that I stress to myself, but also to my team, is setting the proper expectations. So up front, I do a lot of work up front, and the reason I do as much work as I do, or as much scrutiny as I do, is because I don't want to have to do that much work the rest of the process.
put the work, right, and it will pay off at the end.
100%. And then I can move on to servicing someone else. Now, I always leave like when we lock a rate and we're actually going to full application, I end that conversation every time with, understand I have a team that works for me. I have a process in place. These people are very efficient and they will correspond with you over the paperwork, clerical stuff, but I am always here. I've not abandoned you. I'm not gone out of this transaction. If it's a bank statement or a pay stub, you're going to correspond with them. If it's a question of numbers and of rates and of, anything that's out of that, simple streamlined stuff, I'm here.
Drew, I want to pivot here with you for a second.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your journey now that you've been doing loans now for 16 years, right? So, I want to get to the point that how has it evolved, right? And how is it going to evolve more now that we're living in this digital world? Yeah. So in 2004, when you started, what has been the biggest change from now until then of, like what was it that, like, efficiency wise or even virtual wise, like where were you in 2004 that you can't believe, like, man, I was doing it that way?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the pendulum swing at least, I would say, 3 times in that 16 years, right? At first, I mean, just from a technology standpoint, let's start right there, right? Yeah. We did everything face-to-face. We did a paper application. For a client for us to submit a file to underwriting, we literally printed out all their pay stubs, all their bank statements, all their tax returns, and we put it into a manila folder, right? And that file then physically got sent upstairs to underwriting, which is crazy, And that was a guaranteed rate. Before that, when I was in Lakeshore Funding, it was a broker situation, and we would literally FedEx the entire package to, say, City Mortgage in St. Louis. And, and then they would underwrite it and fax us an approval, and that approval would have all the conditions, and then we'd have to fax in the conditions. What's that?
Say fax? What's a fax?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So that, that's technology, right? I mean, that's just the simple, like, holy cow, that was so much more laborious and clunky before. One great thing for me of being in, the right situation is Guarantee Rate was on the forefront of technology. We went paperless. I don't even remember, 2009 maybe, 2010. Yeah. We went paperless. That was before we had like a full online application, but we were still doing DocuSign. So that's, the technology side of it. As far as, the systems or the process from an underwriting or a risk analysis perspective, in 2004, when I started in the business, they literally gave you a phone book and said, just call on people because you could get anyone a mortgage. Right. Like, it was really that simple. And rates had, at that point gone from the 7s and 6s and now down into the 5s. And we thought that was the craziest thing ever, interest rates in the low 5%. And we were, literally calling people just to refinance. And we didn't need much at all from them. It was never a question of, can I get you a loan? It was just, which loan can I put you in? Right. Obviously, then we, move into 2008 and 2009, and the pendulum swung so far back the other way. It went into a world of, I couldn't get great borrowers loans. Right. We had 2 years, I would say there, 2009 to 11, where it was like banging your head against the wall repeatedly. Yep. And it was frustrating. And, some people can say rightly so, because we were so out of line, before in our industry. After 2011, 2012, that's when I feel like things started to settle in. We still saw several years of it being very difficult and more challenging than it maybe necessarily needs to be. But things started to settle in, and we really moved back into traditional, responsible lending practices. And I always say, like, in 2010, call it, I had to relearn my business. I had to relearn my job. I had never learned those traditional, responsible underwriting practices or risk analysis practices. Now we're in a new time. Right. I would say over the last 5 years, things have really loosened up nicely. And I mean nicely because I think that they're still responsible. and they're still healthy, but they're a little more make sense, right?
Yeah.
We're able to navigate around things that 5 years ago were like this big obstacle that now it's like, as long as we can make sense of something, right? People are going to move money around between their accounts. People are going to have situations where they lent their brother 10 grand and now their brother's giving them back 10 grand. Things like that, that 5 years ago, that could have been a deal killer in certain circumstances. And in the last few years, we've seen things normalize. We've also seen the jumbo market normalize. We did, right, up until recently. So in general, I think lending has leveled out to a place that makes sense and is responsible. Now we're talking about the last 60 days. And, in the last 60 days, everything has changed. There were moments in March that I firmly believe, I don't think I'm, having tunnel vision on this. There were moments in March that were more volatile than 2008 was. And most people don't know that and didn't see that. And it's a good thing that most people didn't see that.
Mm-hmm.
We had about a 2-week period where the mortgage market as a whole, it felt like it was going to blow up. We had days where I pre-approved someone and quoted them a 30-year fix at 3.25%. They went under contract 2 days later, and that rate was at 4.5%. And that was an anomaly. It was bizarre. It was strange behavior. There was a lot of panic going on in the markets all around.
Yeah.
That, for the most part, has settled in. The Fed has pumped tons of money into our world, and that's helped ease a lot of that panic. But we've still seen a lot of changes from what you're talking about with the processing and a system side. First of all, jumbo lenders have tightened their guidelines back up. I still think it is looser than it was 5+ years ago, and I still think it's in a pretty good, healthy, responsible place. I think it's, for the most part, jumbo lenders are now requiring 20% down. I would like to see them open up to 15% down again, and I think we will. I think there's plenty of good, responsible borrowers that are low risk that don't want to push 20% down on a jumbo mortgage. And I think we will see that. It's just going to be a matter of time before we see that. Aside from those, risk analysis factors, we've got a whole nother piece of the puzzle as far as getting you to a closing table with verification of employment right now. And rightly so. With COVID and the wreckage that it has wreaked on the economy, people are losing their jobs in staggering numbers. And so at one point, we had tightened up so much that we had to verify your employment within 48 hours of closing. And we were holding closing packages back until that was verified. And that, again, was a little bit of a panic on our end. I know there are some banks and some lenders in the industry that are still holding that 48-hour rule. We've opened it up to 5 days, but we're still going to verify your employment and your income, not just, do you work here, but have you taken a pay cut?
And Drew, what was it before COVID? It was 48 hours, 5 days, but what was that time?
Usually the final verification of employment was usually within 10 days of closing, and it was just a simple verbal phone call. Okay. Now, the phone call is still there where it's asking for an email from the employer. It got real tricky there for a few weeks because everyone was working from home and they were new to working from home. Right? So you had entire HR departments at big companies that had all shifted to working remotely. So there was a few weeks where it was really, really challenging. I think everyone, nationwide, across business in general, is starting to settle into this new normal, and so people are adapting more. And again, we realized that we were trying to mitigate risk by making sure that people haven't lost their job, right, as close to closing as possible. But we were also causing more struggles in the closing process. So it was finding a balance. Where do we find that balance of making sure we feel comfortable from a risk standpoint, but not sacrificing service to such a level that everyone's doing a fire drill on the morning of closing.
Right. I mean, just listening to you, Drew, and seeing just even a couple of weeks ago, there seemed to be a chaos, right? And then seems to be a little bit more of a calming going down. But what are you, okay, where do you, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but you've been studying this for 16 years. What do you think happens to the rates? Do you think that they have to stay? Do they think they have to go, or go up? What do you think happens during this time?
Well, I mean, we've seen an interesting kind of flip in the jumbo versus conventional world, right? 6 months ago, jumbo rates were lower than conventional conforming loan rates. And as the bond market went crazy, right, and the stock market started to tank, we saw interest rates plummet. And typically, mortgage-backed securities, which is your conforming conventional Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac loans, those will follow the bond market. And the bond market or the 10-year yield fell off a cliff and mortgages hit a floor.
Right.
I think personally, as far as conforming rates go, I think we stay in the low 3% on a 30-year fix. Okay, we've seen it test 3%. We've seen it test, break through that maybe for a moment or two for your absolute perfect scenario, getting 2.875. I think that's the floor. I think there is a natural floor to this thing. There's a certain level when investors and traders and the banks are asking themselves, is 30-year term worth the reward? A 30-year risk worth the reward of 2.5%, right? I think there comes a point where we're worried about the floor. You hear people say, oh, I got a 2.5 or a 2.625 on a 30-year fix. They're paying a bunch of money to get that down, right? And they're paying points. Historically, I've not been a huge fan of paying points. I just don't think it's the best investment for people, right? If you're going to spend extra money, there's other places to put your money. In this current environment and atmosphere, it's something to be reconsidered, because when you consider, if I'm going to be in this house long term, for me to spend an extra $3 or $4 or $5 grand and I can get a rate of 2.75%, I mean, that's crazy. And I firmly believe that rates will stay low for the next, I'd say 9 to possibly 18 months.
Right.
But we will never see rates this low again. Now, I say that with a smile on my face because I said the same thing in 2016. So, take it for what it's worth, and we are truly living in unprecedented times.
Yeah.
But, as far as the forecast goes, I believe conforming rates stay in the low 3% on a 30-year fix, your 15 years in the mid to high 2s. I think jumbo market will come around. The jumbo market held back for a while, and rates have been higher than conforming loans. I think the jumbo market just needs to settle in a little more and feel a little more comfortable with what's going to happen moving forward. Those jumbo loans aren't traded on the secondary market, so they're not being driven down by traders, right? They're not necessarily being driven down by a demand. And also with a lot of the jumbo lenders tightening their guidelines, they started looking at it and saying, why would we take on more risk here when we have more applications over here than we can handle? Right. So it makes sense. It's a supply and demand thing. I think that as we settle in, as the economy starts to flush out with this unemployment stuff, and as refinancing starts to decline, then you'll see the jumbo market start to open up.
Got it. So Drew, I was going to ask you, you personally, I know you track your numbers and stuff. What, you said you're doing a lot of refis right now, but what about new purchases as far as applications for new purchases? How has your business been affected over the past 60 days with that?
I have been completely floored by the amount of activity in the Chicago real estate market through the quarantine, through the stay-at-home order. When this thing came down, call it, March 10th-ish, I figured we would finish out the pipeline. People who were under contract would close, with the exception of anyone losing their jobs. I figured we'd close out that pipeline, but I really did not expect to see new contracts for 60 days. Like, I thought it would come to a screeching halt.
Right.
It was quite the opposite. I did track my numbers, and for new contracts for the second half of March and into April, for all of April, I ran at about 40 to 45% of an average spring market, which, obviously is not, the highest spring market. And it's disappointing because this spring market started in January, and it was really heating up when this thing, all came down on us.
Right.
But 40 to 45% was way higher than I expected.
Yeah.
And to me, incredibly promising sign that there is a pent-up demand in this market that we're seeing. Furthermore, in the last 48 hours, my contracts are through the roof. Like we've seen, yesterday was like, oh wow, we're back to spring market.
Right.
People are out there. People are they've settled into a new normal, and a lot of people are tired of this new normal with whatever their living situation might be.
Yeah, you're absolutely starting to see it. So what I've noticed in our business, especially in the beginning of this pandemic, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, was the price point. And you said about the jumbos and stuff like that. So, the price point was, hey, if you were under 400 grand in the Chicago market, you were still getting activity, right? But anything above that, the 500 or something like that, it was, and you're still maybe not even a jumbo, right? If depending on how much you're putting down, but it was like a mental ceiling of that was being broken. Did you see that in your business as well, as far as a lower price point?
We 100% saw that. And I have a couple of theories that I think are pretty substantiated. One is that lower price point tends to not have families, right? And to have kids that they have to up and move, right? We had more first-time home buyers in that lower price point. And first-time home buyers were renting, and if their leases were coming up, they were probably moving one way or the other.
Right.
If they had their mind set on buying a place and getting out of being a renter, they were typically going to do it. Or more people in that situation were doing it than others. I think your higher price points had less of an incentive to move, meaning that they probably had space to deal with the quarantine for now. They might have had a family with kids, and then it was a matter of do they, and they already owned a home, so do they want to list their place and have people come walking through their place? Right. There were so many unknowns there. Plus, you had the stock market, shave off about 30% for a few weeks there, right? And those higher price points are more vested in the stock market, right? So they had more to lose.
Yeah, got it. Those are very solid theories, right? And I agree with you on that as well. So. All right. So we're now living in this digital world, Drew,
we are living in the digital world.
Yeah, so we're living in this digital world. How has your business changed digitally, right? Over the past 60 days? Like what have you seen that you weren't doing 2 months ago or 3 months ago that you're doing now?
Honestly, for us, almost nothing, which is incredible. And that's really why, Guaranteed Rate and my team, we were ahead of the curve, and we've really gained some ground on this because our systems were already in place. We were already set up to work remotely. Right. Everything is electronic. When I started at Guaranteed Rate, we have our team is called a pod, and it was set up where literally like I'm the rainmaker, and I sat at one desk, and my whole team sat on a crescent moon table in front of me, right? Nowadays, that's not the case. I have one processor that works out of her home in Galena. The rest of my team was in the office still, but not all together, not all on the same floor even. So we were set up to work remotely. I mean, we, as a company, Guaranteed Rate moved 3,000 employees overnight into their home offices. It was literally a matter of just issuing monitors and docking stations. But from a processing standpoint, like we were ready for it. We have the full online application with uploading your docs. We had a full e-close already set up. Right. So I think we were ahead of the curve. So for me, it really hasn't changed. The biggest change for me, Joe, in this quarantine has not been working from home. It's been working from home while the entire family is home.
Yeah, right.
That's the challenge, right? When you have a 5.5-year-old who no longer gets to go to the playground or swimming or gymnastics or any of that other stuff, that's your new challenge.
That's been the biggest challenge. All right, so Drew, real estate agents out there, right?
Yep.
There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of buyers out there. Some, as there's some of them pulling the trigger, but some of them saying, I just don't know if right now is a good time to buy, or what about the lending, or am I going to be able to close on time? Things like that. I just had a conversation with an agent right now saying, I'm scared that they can't give the loan in 35 days. So first question, what advice are you giving real estate agents right now of lending, and two, let's talk about what are some of the lending requirements as far as how quickly can you close loans, and what's the delay if there is one?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel like we're beating a dead horse when I say this, but like it's more important now than ever to know your lender, right? And know your buyer's lender. Right? When your buyer comes to you with a pre-approval from some online shop that you've never heard of before, you have more leverage right now to make a buyer use your team than you ever have. And by your team, I mean your attorney, your lender, your inspector, et cetera. Because everyone is, everyone's kind of on high alert. Everyone's got a higher level of anxiety right now, and rightly so. I'm still closing loans in 30 days, no problem. I can close a fairly simple purchase in 2 weeks if I had to do it right now. But it's really crucial that you're vetting the pre-approval, and that's from a listing standpoint too, right? I do loans all over the country. In most markets right now, people aren't even doing a showing if you don't come with a pre-approval letter.
Yeah.
And if you're going to put forth an offer, a lot of times I'm hearing listing agents, if they get a pre-approval letter from a lender they've never heard of, they're wanting them to at least talk to their lender and get vetted there. Make sure the lender you're working with understands the timeline. Again, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here. You guys have heard all of this before, but it's more important now than ever. Make sure the lender is running the file through automated underwriting before your pre-approval. You might, or before you submit your offer, you might get an appraisal waiver. Right now, we're doing a lot of appraisal waivers where we're getting, we don't need an appraisal at all, or we can simply do a drive-by appraisal. If I can get an appraisal back in 5 days or less, there's no reason I can't close a loan in 2 weeks. As long as, everyone's motivated, as long as the attorneys are getting us title, the buyers are getting us all their taxes.
Got it.
I just think it's more about like getting as much as you can upfront right now and setting proper expectations.
Got it. So closing in 30 to 45 days, it's happening. You're seeing it happen all the time.
It's happening for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Drew, what about appraisals? Are you starting to see more, you lived through the 2007, financial crisis. Have you seen any pushback now with appraisers? I know you can't speak with them or anything like that, but are you seeing them kind of tightening up a little bit given the time?
So far, so good. So far, so good. I think if we're going to see those issues that we saw in, I don't think we'll see anywhere near the magnitude of the issues we saw in 2009, 2010, right? When appraisals came in low like crazy. And really, we saw that even more so in 12 and 13 when the market started to recover. And and there was no data to support higher prices. If we have that issue, I don't think we'll have anywhere near that magnitude. If we do have that issue, I don't think we'll see it for 6 to 12 months, right? We are really still fresh in this crisis right now, and nobody knows for sure what it looks like 6 months ago or 6 months from now. I keep telling my clients, like, think about where you were 90 days ago. Think about what your outlook on life and business and real estate and family was 90 days ago. Okay? I mean, that is a wildly different headspace you were in then than you're in now. So with the appraisers, we'll see what happens. It's going to be, you guys will know first, right, what the data is showing. Yeah. If we see home values declining, that's when it gets a little bit more challenging. You might have cases where you really need to vet the lower down payment buyers, right, on your listings. If somebody's coming with 5% down, you really need to vet them as far as like, would they be flexible to put 10% down if the appraisal came in low?
Are you guys as guaranteed rate, and you being in the front lines of the financial world, what is the outlook as far as short sales and or foreclosures coming with the unemployment? You guys,
it's a great question, not one that I'm totally comfortable speaking to at this point. Again, I just feel like there's so much unknown going on.
Yeah,
I think it's inevitable to a certain extent, right? It just has to be. When we're talking about 30 million people filing for unemployment, right? Like, I mean, these are staggering numbers that are completely unprecedented. Like, we're going back to, the Great Depression to find any sort of precedent for these kind of numbers, and that was a different world. So I don't think you can necessarily compare the two. So there's got to be some fallout, right? I mean, there's just tens of millions of people losing their jobs. The question is what does the recovery look like? Everybody, I think agrees the recovery is probably going to be slow because we can't just open the doors overnight, right, to all business. I don't think we will see anything like we saw in the housing crisis. This issue was not created by housing, right? While the unemployment is staggering, I think a large portion of those people will get back to work.
Yeah.
Within a reasonable 6-month period, 6 to 12-month period. It's inevitable we'll have some fallout. I mean, your foreclosures and your short sales are going to go up. I just don't think it's going to be devastating for our market.
Drew, what about the mortgage world? Are you guys seeing your competitors shut the doors? Are you guys thriving during this time? Like what's going on?
So we've totally been thriving. It's again, from a mindset standpoint, it's kind of hard for me some days because we have clients that lost their jobs or took major pay cuts, right? And meanwhile, we're busier than we've ever been. I mean, I'm running at probably 150% of my average month right now.
Yeah.
So we are certainly thriving from it, and I have to remind my team that it's important to have a good bedside manner with clients, right? Because people are going through hard times, and again, there's a higher level of anxiety. People have more stress in their life right now than they're used to. You're working from home. Even if you're used to working remotely, you're not used to doing it with all the kids in the house all day long.
Yeah.
But from our standpoint, we're winning. Like, this is an incredible time. It's also an incredible time for us to pick up market share. We are seeing some mortgage companies that have shut their doors, right? There were some people that were stuck in what was called the non-QM, right? Non-qualified mortgage. That is, what is the newer version of what we used to call subprime, right? And it's not nearly as reckless as it was back in the mid 2000s, but it was a higher risk type of a loan. We had very, very little exposure to that market. I mean, like less than 1% of our overall volume. So you are seeing some of that. You're seeing some companies that can't keep up with the processing side of it right now, right? I mean, there is more that's going into it right now than there was before.
Yeah.
And then also companies that weren't able to just mobilize their staff overnight.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, for a couple of weeks there, they were like, there was some deals I remember they were just like, we're not taking phone calls right now. We're just we're just.
That was as much a supply issue, a capacity issue as anything else for a while there. I think it's really crucial right now. A lot of lenders are short-sighted, right? Yeah, rates are low and refis are great. The rates aren't going to stay low forever.
No.
And I've built my career on relationships with guys like you, right? And so I, in early March, was calling all my agents and saying to them, listen, it is insane in this industry. My number one priority are my realtor relationships.
Yeah.
So if you're having issues with any other lender, call me. My team knows that we are 100% prioritizing our buyers over our refis.
Yeah.
And I think that's the long term, that's the only way to approach it. And like I said, a lot of lenders are short-sighted and they're quote unquote too busy for you.
Drew, I think you kind of answered my last question, but you can elaborate on it a little bit. My last question for you is, you've built a great business, right? And you talked about the mindset pivot that you had. What advice would you give people that are just starting out or want to pivot their business to say, hey, I want to build a big business? What advice does Drew Boland tell them?
Yeah, I mean, again, sit down and identify your limiting beliefs. That would be number one, right? What is the ceiling that is on you, and who's putting it there? Because I assure you, no one's putting it there but you. And where does that come from? I think so much of it, so much of success, and you see really successful people, it's mindset, and you can see it in their demeanor. You can hear it in their voice. You can see it in their reactions to stressful situations. And the reality is that, it's me versus me when it comes to my success, right? And once you can sit down and identify your own limiting beliefs, then you can start to work on the rest. Then you can start to identify, where are my challenges? Where are the actual physical challenges to my job, to my industry, to my process. And then how do I fine tune those?
Drew, that is great advice. I cannot thank you enough for spending the last 45 minutes with us and dropping some serious knowledge. Drew, where do people find you if they need some advice as far as their lending is concerned?
Drew@rate.com is the easiest. Couldn't be an easier email. Drew@rate.com. And you've got all my contact, Joe, if you want to post.
Yeah, anyone that needs it, that's listening or is here now and needs Drew's contact information, and Drew@rate.com, or contact me. I have his bat phone as well. I can get a hold of him.
Exactly.
Drew, thank you so much for your time today. You're the man. I appreciate you very much. Cheers.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. Take care.
Tomorrow as well, we'll send out the email blast. The Facebook post. Melissa Vasek is going to take us through your vibe. Your vibe attracts your tribe. So tune in for that tomorrow. Thanks, Drew. Appreciate you, buddy.
Thanks, guys. Take care.